spot.
Oh wow, I'm now live. Hi everybody. Live in one of my favorite spots in the world, under the oaks in California. Those of you who live in California, you know what an incredible day we've had here. It was like 80 degrees outside and we were loving every minute of it. So we're here again to talk about our book club selection, Hidden Valley Road. Hidden Valley Road. And it's Earth Day, so we're outdoors, celebrating the outdoors. We spent most of the day outdoors. And the sun's just moving, gonna set in a couple of hours. If you have a chance to get outside, I certainly advise that you do that with a mask on if you're living in a city and gonna be around people. But you know, my dearly beloved friend Gail has been in the house now for 17 days, has not been outside, not in an elevator, not out the door, not had a breath of fresh air, hasn't heard a bird. And it's so beautiful out. The birds are louder, the sky is clearer because there's not as much pollution. So the earth is recovering itself here on Earth Day. As we're here to talk about Hidden Valley Road, I'm excited because this week we're talking about chapters 5 through 7. Those of you who are following us with this book, you know what an incredible story it is with Donnell and Mimi Galvin, who have 12 children, and of the 12, 6 of the boys are schizophrenic. And when they got married, they thought that their hard work for that picture-perfect family was going to be the thing. And then they realized that one by one, their children were becoming ill in an era when nobody even knew what it was or what schizophrenia was. Because there are so many myths and misconceptions about schizophrenia that we've learned from the movies or even from novels, I wanted to talk today with one of the top experts in the field. I mean, this doctor is the doctor. If you have someone in your family or you have schizophrenia, world-renowned expert. Joining us from his home in Boston is Dr. Dost. Dost, he is the chief of the psychotic disorders division at McLean Hospital and is a professor at Harvard Medical School. Let's see if I can find him. Where is he now? Dost, are you there? Oh, Dost, are you there? Waiting for Dost. Connecting Dost. There you are. Hello.
Hi, Oprah.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you for having me on. Happy
Happy
to
Earth
be here.
Day. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day to you.
Well, have you been reading with us Hidden Valley Road?
I sure have.
And isn't it an incredible story? But did you know about this family? I would think that being in your field, you all would
That's
have
right.
known this is a very famous family.
It is a well-known family, and I know the researchers who worked with the family, but I didn't know personally, of course, the family or many of the details. And the book is well done, and it does a very good job of identifying people's motivations, you know, what each individual was trying to accomplish in their lives and how things can go so horribly wrong.
Yes, and how not only how things can go so horribly wrong, but as a student of schizophrenia, a doctor of it now, how incredibly wrong we had it in the beginning. I mean, in
That's
the
right.
first early chapters of Hidden Valley, we see that doctors are blaming the mothers. They thought it was because you had an overbearing mother that made you schizophrenic. Can you define what it is?
Sure. Schizophrenia is a psychiatric disorder. It's a brain disorder, of course, with also very important psychological overlays. It's characterized by what we call psychosis. That includes things like hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that aren't really there. Delusional thinking, those are thoughts that have no basis in reality. Oftentimes it has to do with feeling like one is in danger or one's family is in danger and something bad is going to happen, even though it's not really true.
So that's levels of paranoia, right?
The paranoia is an example of that. You got it.
So
That's right.
it's paranoia. Do paranoia and schizophrenia go hand in hand?
They do. Paranoia is one of the things that happens in a disease like schizophrenia. Not everybody who has psychosis has schizophrenia, but schizophrenia is one of the big ones. So sometimes we talk about psychotic disorders more broadly as well.
And how common is it? How common is it? The fact that they
It's
had
actually
six sons.
Yeah. Of course, this family's special. It's not. This is, something unusual happened in this family, clearly. But schizophrenia is actually a very common illness. It afflicts about 1% of the population. Year after year, high school class after high school class, there are going to be, a few kids that are going to have this illness. And importantly, people with this illness have a very hard time living independently or working. And so it really robs people of their ability to have an ordinary life and to accomplish what they want to do.
It's so interesting. I'm going to interrupt because we have a short amount of time here for the next 15, 20 minutes. But doesn't it normally show up around high school or around age 18 or 19? And is it more prevalent in boys?
You got it. It's late adolescence to early adulthood. The classic age window is 18 to 25. Wow. More than 90% of people who are going to get it in that time window. And it is overrepresented in boys by a little bit. It's usually, depending on what sample you look at, 60-40, so 60% will be men. But as the years go on, some women tend to get it a little later, so it actually evens out to 1-to-1.
It seems like many of us don't really understand what it is. I think a typical misunderstanding makes people still think that schizophrenia is having multiple personalities or split personality, which is not true, right?
It's not the same thing at all. It's totally unrelated. It's an unfortunate, legacy of using this term schizophrenia, which actually does mean split brain or split mind. But in daily parlance, people will say, oh, I'm schizophrenic about what movie I want to go see. That's not what we're talking about here. It's not about multiple personalities or being of two minds. It's a severe brain illness. And it's typically relapsing, remitting, and it's typically lifelong. So this is not anything to trifle at.
So if you have a schizophrenia, you're going to have it. It's not like it can be managed through medication, correct? But if you have it, you're going to always have it.
Medications help and therapy helps too, but that's right. There's, people debate whether there's such a thing as being cured from schizophrenia. If it exists, it's extremely rare. Most people who have the problem, who can function very well and overcome a lot of the challenges, but they're going to live with it, and they always have to be on their guard managing the illness.
Why is there so much shame and stigma surrounding this disease? We see this over and over again in Hidden Valley Road. I think for them in the beginning, they didn't know what it was, because in the 50s and 60s, and even as late as the 70s, people still didn't understand it.
Yeah, it's a long history there. You mentioned blaming the mother, and the psychiatrists have looked at that over the ages, but the reality is how a family deals with it after it happens is more important than, raising your child a certain way. We all have personalities, we all raise our children differently. That is not how somebody gets schizophrenia, but how a family reacts to it is important. Acknowledging the problem, trying to get help, being clear-eyed about what's going on, and not sweeping things under the rug is very important. Unfortunately, stigma gets in the way of that.
So you're a leading researcher for this disease. What do we know today, and what do we still not know?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a complex disease. There is no one thing that causes it for any person that gets it. Of course, there are genetic components to this, but there's no one gene for schizophrenia. There are literally hundreds of genes that are involved in small ways, and then all the life experiences that one builds. So it emerges over time. There's no one single story. It's a complex disorder, and what we really don't understand is how to make an impact on the trajectory. When somebody is getting it, can we intervene early and make a difference? Yeah. And the book is, of course, a little bit about that, because if these teenagers, as they are starting to have abnormal behaviors and they're not feeling well, they want to go get help, in periods. But what is the help that would be really necessary to prevent that lifelong evolution? We don't know a lot about that.
Yes, and as we are discussing this book week to week, it's hard not to ask questions of the readers and not sound like we are in judgment. I'm not in judgment at all. We're just questioning what the times were and how people looked at things then versus now. We have some great questions for you, Dr. Unger, from our readers. Okay, first one, Jackie 3 Duran wants to know, hey, Jackie 3 Duran, I saw this question. What should be the first steps we take if you suspect someone in your family is struggling with mental illness?
Great question. These are medical conditions. Trying to solve it through, coddling as a family or ignoring and sweeping it under the rug is not going to work. You need to get professional help. Psychiatrists are medical doctors, and they're usually the people who can address these issues. And with proper treatment and early intervention, a lot of these problems can be managed quite effectively. So you just have to be mindful that waiting is not the right answer. These are sometimes, you know, scary things or spooky things, what families are dealing with. And if you have a young person who's not behaving right, you don't know what's going to happen next. Go get help. Don't sit on it.
Well, those of you who haven't started reading the book, you can download the link in my bio and get the book immediately. But I will tell you, a lot of people have questions having read about this family and continuing to read about this family. Does birth order play a factor in who might have it in the family? And if so, how so?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, there's no strong evidence that being firstborn or lastborn actually makes a huge difference. Some studies actually have suggested that the younger kids in big families may be at greater risk. That's not what happened here in this family, so it's interesting. So no, there's no strong connection with being firstborn or being some of the earlyborns.
Okay, that's Clara Hastings asked that. Ginny 1116 wants to know, in the book, they talk a lot about Don and Mimi's passive parenting and preoccupation with status. Can you talk about parenting and parenting styles as they may relate to mental illness in our children?
Sure. So that's an important point. And, you know, it gets wrapped in with the blaming the mother history that psychiatry has that we need to move away from.
Yeah.
You can't give your child schizophrenia by being a certain kind of parent. Of course, some of the very traumatic things that happen to people when they're little, when they're children and adolescents, can disrupt brain development and can contribute to psychiatric disorders. But we're not talking about...
Can do to give your child schizophrenia.
You can't give your child schizophrenia by being a certain kind of parent. Nobody signs up for this.
But if your child has schizophrenia, how you handle it and what your response is matters
a great deal.
Matters how they learn to function.
If your child is developing this problem, then you need to swing into action and help them. That's really the biggest message here.
Why do we think it shows itself in those high school years or early college years?
Yeah, there's a big mystery there. You asked about what don't we really know. That's another big question. Of course, brain development actually matures well into our teenage years and even into our early 20s. So something is happening at that time when the brain is ready to function as an adult, but it's actually, you know, in somebody who has schizophrenia, it's going off the rails in a way that we don't fully understand, but it's happening in that critical period.
Okay, I bet a lot of people worry about this issue. Cam Puff wants to know, do recreational drugs bring out schizophrenia, or does schizophrenia occur with continual recreational drug use?
Yeah, so this is another important question. The big drug that's associated with schizophrenia is cannabis. It's weed. We don't really understand the relationship very well, but cannabis smoking in teenage years is associated with schizophrenia. Alcohol is not, tobacco is not. Even cocaine and crystal meth and all of those, they can make people psychotic, but they don't give people schizophrenia. Those are usually temporary. But cannabis, sustained cannabis use, is associated with schizophrenia. There's a lot of debate about whether it really causes that, but this is something society should know. Of course, in our society now, attitudes towards cannabis have changed quite a lot. But this is not about legalization or criminalization. This is about a very clear medical condition that we have to be wary of. Teenagers who are smoking a lot of weed are at higher risk of developing schizophrenia down the road. That's what society needs to know.
So do we know whether or not they're at a higher risk of developing it, or the smoking of the weed enhances what was already there?
You're thinking like a scientist. That's exactly the million-dollar question we're trying to answer. We don't have a clear answer.
I'm thinking like a scientist here on Earth Day. Well, yeah,
that's right.
I know. I have some people who I know who have bipolar disorder, and that bipolar disorder gets decidedly worse when they're smoking weed.
Absolutely. There's a clear relationship. The problem is just what you said. Is it that they were going to get worse and the weed is part of the package, or is the weed actually making them worse? And there's a lot of evidence that it probably is making them worse. So I'm on the camp that says, you know, if you have a teenager in particular who's smoking a lot of weed, that's asking for trouble, and they shouldn't be doing that.
Okay, Nelson Kaz, C-A-Z, asks, is there an instance where you consider the treatment for schizophrenia is worse than the disease? Because what we're seeing as you continue to read Hidden Valley Road
Yeah.
is some of
This is
that.
the unfortunate reality. We mentioned medications earlier and therapy too. The treatments that we have are not what they should be. They are not always effective, and even when they are effective, the medications have significant side effects. So for a lot of young people, things like gaining too much weight or sleeping too much, and having many other sexual side effects, it feels like the treatment is worse than the disease. And this is why we need so much more research to come up with better treatments. This is a huge unmet need.
I have two more questions. Someone wanted to know, manic depression and schizophrenia are prominent in my mom's, sisters, and mothers. Does it skip a generation, or is that a myth?
Yeah, so first of all, let me say genetics is not destiny. Just because you have somebody close to you in your family with a mental illness does not mean you're going to develop it also. People who share all of their genes, monozygotic twins, sometimes one of them will have an illness and the other will not. So genetics is not everything, but it certainly raises the risk. The skipping a generation is mostly a myth. There is an occasional family where you see that, but that is not the rule. It can show up in any generation. So you're not protected just because you had it in the previous generation.
Okay, final question. One of our readers has this question about precursors. They ask, I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. My 14-year-old daughter has recently been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Can those disorders be considered precursors to schizophrenia?
So, no, they're not automatic precursors. So many young people these days have anxiety and depression in teenage years. Not all of them are going to go on to have schizophrenia. It's true that some people who later have schizophrenia started with anxiety and depression. So, in some people they can be, but don't take that as a sign because these things are so common. You can't use that to predict who's going to have schizophrenia down the line.
Well, what do you think of this book as you're reading this book?
I'm enjoying reading it. It's written with such clear language, and what I like about it is, again, it tries to lay out the motivations of each individual in a non-judgmental way. The parents are trying as hard as they can. The kids are trying to find their way in life. Nobody signs up for this kind of misery. It's the illness that actually took away the lives of these young people and really is tearing this family apart. And this book really lays that out in a very compassionate way.
Well, I think that the great work that you and your colleagues are doing at McLean's, I've had several of my girls, family members, friends who I've all sent to McLean's for various situations in their life. And I think that the great work that you all do there is just outstanding. So I thank you for your continued efforts in trying to help to make the world better through our...
Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, for our minds. It's really a great institution. Thank you so much. We got to get going here on Earth Day.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. And you all
Take
make
care.
sure to follow us on Oprah at Oprah's Book Club. We'll be reading Hidden Valley Road for the coming weeks. The story is even so much bigger than schizophrenia as we learn more about Don and Mimi, about how marriage and their family roles all play a big part in this conflict that occurs in families. I think when people discover that they have it in the families, the shame and the stigma and all of that is laid out so beautifully in Robert Kolker's book. So thank you all for joining us. I'd love you to come read with us at Oprah's Book Club. Thanks, Dr. Ankur. Thank you so much.